This week on the Quillette podcast, I'll be turning to some lighter fare. Specifically, I'll be talking about the fascinating world of elite Scrabble with a true expert in the field. Toronto-based mathematician, linguist, and Scrabble tournament organizer John Chu. He's someone who happens to live in my neighborhood, which is how I originally met him. But he spends much of his life circling the globe, overseeing Scrabble tournaments in such places as Bangkok, Malta, and this month, Baltimore, Maryland, where John was overseeing the 2025 Scrabble Players Championship. In our interview, John and I discussed Scrabble in the context of various other classic board games, including chess, which, by the way, is going to be the subject of a coming Quillette podcast in September, when I interviewed Danny Wrench of chess.com, who's got a new book out called Dark Squares. For the time being, please enjoy my interview with international Scrabble master, John Chu. John Chu, thanks so much for appearing on the Quillette podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, John.
Okay, so I was complimenting you on the fact that you're probably my only guest since the COVID era who's worn a tie on the podcast. And I've learned, it's a Scrabble tie.
The Scrabble tie.
And this podcast is appearing in audio and video, so the stunning close-up visual effects will be lost on our audio-only podcast listeners.
I should say then it is a dark blue tie with images of wooden Scrabble tiles at regular intervals spelling T-I-E in a pleasing repeating pattern.
Yeah, it's extremely pleasing. And I also learned that you're required to wear a tie.
Totally. I require it of myself, actually. One has to maintain standards.
Were you joking with me, or is it actually because of your position of authority?
I was totally yanking your chain when I said that. However, we do, in fact, require all of our officials, and this is no joke, we require all of our floor officials at events to wear striped referee shirts, so black and white stripes that make them look like zebras.
Okay.
And there was initially some pushback about that when we started it, but it just... Otherwise, it makes it too hard for people to identify who the actual officials are and who's just some random player trying to be helpful.
As somebody who's quite familiar with the uneven standards of dress and decorum at board game tournaments, I'm just impressed that everyone's wearing a shirt.
I have had to actually make official rulings about people's clothing being too unintentionally revealing and had to send them back to their hotel rooms to get changed, or in some cases just changed to like a seat that has a properly covered back to it. So
sorry, I can't leave that as a parenthetical. Without naming names, obviously. What kind of outfits are we talking about?
We're talking older men who, in this case, have had a wardrobe failure in their in the elastic that was holding up their sweatpants.
Okay, I am totally losing interest. I thought that was going in a different direction.
Oh, no. There's also the opposite direction too, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was unsettling. Let's proceed more toward...
Oh, well, you see, that was the whole unsettling nature of that was why I had to actually step in. If a woman or a man wears something that's attractively revealing, there aren't usually too many complaints that come to my attention. I had no idea we're going to be talking about this. I thought you wanted to know about Scrabble.
Well, this is the world of Scrabble that, people don't see on TV. Aside from what's a valid word and what's not a valid word in Scrabble, what kind of rulings are you called on to make in your capacity as an authority figure at these tournaments?
If I end up having to intervene, it means that something has gone terribly wrong, because we have officials on the floor to make rulings, and then we've got someone overseeing them. And if someone wants to appeal further, they can appeal to me.
So you're like the general manager. When someone says, I need to speak to your boss, you're the boss.
I am, yes.
But when you say ruling, what does a ruling mean in the context of Scrabble?
So the Scrabble rule book consists of more than 40 pages of detailed rules describing procedures for how exactly the game is to be played. In fact, if you want to describe how the game of Scrabble needs to be played, you can do that in about 6 pages for tournament context. And the 40-page rule book is all about what to do when things go off the rails, when things go wrong. And the ways in which people can get themselves into trouble have to do with the sequence of events that takes place while you're playing, because it's not like if you're looking at, say, chess, you move a piece, you hit the clock. You're supposed to do that with the same hand, I think. But with Scrabble, you have to move a bunch of pieces from one place to another. You could drop them. You could flip the board by accident. You have to make sure that they're all in a line and a valid play. You have to calculate the score yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a written record of that score. And then you have to hit the clock. And then your opponent has the opportunity to challenge your play if they think that you've played a word that's not acceptable. But they've got a limited time interval during which they can do that. And so at each of these steps, there's a possibility of something going wrong. A player could put the tiles down in one place and then change their mind, pick them up and put them in another place, and they could leave a tile behind. It doesn't happen so much in chess, I would imagine. You can't leave
No,
like half a bishop behind,
no,
right?
that'd be weird. Yeah.
Although, weird things can happen. Like there are people who play in Thailand who play with tiles that are made of 3 pieces. There's a printed paper inset, and then 2 sort of box lid shaped, nested box lid type pieces that sandwich the piece of paper between them to form a tile. And the reason they do that is so they can play with different alphabets and so on. But because the tile comes in 3 pieces, it's possible for the tile to spontaneously disassemble itself.
Do they need like a 41st page just to handle that?
Yeah. I've had so it's possible in that case to say, I only managed to place 2/3 of the tile onto the board. What do I do with the remaining 1/3? I've overdrawn by 2/3 of a tile. Anyway, so because we're moving tiles from place to place and doing so in a complicated manner, following certain rules, that's a fair amount of it. And then the question of when can I challenge a play? That's also part of it. But when I had a similar conversation with a person that was directing professional poker tournaments, and he said, 40 pages for Scrabble? Why would you need 40 pages to describe Scrabble? And he starts flipping through it and he starts laughing. And I said, what's so funny? He said, you let the players draw their own tiles. Can you imagine a professional Texas Hold'em tournament where the players were allowed to choose their
But
own?
wait a sec, hold that thought, because I know from talking to you, it isn't just like you stick your hand in the feed bag. Like
Oh, no.
you have to hold the bag over your head.
I wish I had a prop here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the tiles are held in a bag, not in a box lid or something. They're held in a bag with a drawstring. The top of the bag has to be at or above your eye level, but your eyes must be averted from it. But the mouth of the bag must be visible to your opponent. Your hand must be visibly empty as it is going into the bag, because you don't want to be accused of putting a cue back into the bag. So nothing up my sleeve or in my hand. It goes in there. And then I draw the tiles out, and then I can put them directly onto my rack. But that might lead to an overdraw situation if I draw too many. And then the tiles have already been mixed with the tiles on my rack. So what do? It's safer to put them down, face down onto the table beside you, and then transfer them to it's complicated.
And as we both know, tabletop gaming is wonderful. You do find some dexterity challenged individuals who become enthusiasts. So what you're describing doesn't sound like rocket science, but you can see how misunderstandings might ensue. And so you're brought in sometimes, and do things get ugly? Like the kind of money that's available isn't Texas Hold'em money. It's not even chess money, but people fly around the world for these tournaments. And so
Sure.
tempers must get pretty hot, right?
I find Scrabble players in general to be fairly even-tempered, and I think it's actually the nature of the game and the sort of people that it attracts that are responsible for that phenomenon. There's just the right amount of luck in the game to me. That is to say, if you're playing chess, then you know that if you lost, it's because your opponent is better than you are. You have to admit that at some point. Fundamentally, if you're playing chess, it's who's better than whom, and that it creates a sort of primatological dominance hierarchy that I find distasteful. And if you're playing bridge, then you know that fundamentally, if something went wrong, it's probably your partner's fault. If you're playing a game with more luck to it, like backgammon or poker, then you think to yourself, oh, I'll just take a risk next time. But
So it's interesting you say that, because I've always said that chess is a terrible game for couples to play because there's no external factor to blame a loss
Yeah.
on. And even if one person's better than the other, it's nice to have that salve to your ego where you can say, I drew bad letters or the dice were bad or something like that. It's just what you said about Scrabble players being even tempered. As I mentioned in the introduction, in a few weeks, we're going to have Danny Wrench on the podcast. He's the co-founder of chess.com. He's written a fantastic new book called Dark Squares. In his book, he describes some absolutely crazy stuff in the chess world. There's a guy, he's passed away, his name is Igor, who was Danny's chess coach when he was young. Igor happens to be Russian and Jewish, and he lost a game and he got up from the table and started screaming things, and then went up to the whiteboard at the front of the room and wrote, "Fuck chess and fuck the Jews," and ran out of the room, for which he was sanctioned.
You need rules to cover that sort of thing too, and we do have a code of conduct.
I can imagine.
And it does very carefully delineate what sort of behavior is permissible and under what contexts and where that we're,
Yeah, so that behavior, I'm guessing, would be probably seen as problematic. But what was interesting about this is, as Wrench notes in his book, you get lots of personalities like that. You get people who are so calm they're almost nonverbal, but then you get people who are just absolute firecrackers and like clearly have some kind of weird personality disorder and abuse alcohol and drugs and stuff like that. I mean, Bobby Fischer is a classic example of brilliant chess player who, of course, also became a conspiracy theorist and an anti-Semite. Why do you get maybe a more uniform and maybe more placid personality type in Scrabble as opposed to chess?
In fact, there are a lot of players, a lot of Scrabble players who at least, expert Scrabble players who at least make it to the chess master level.
Really?
Yeah,
Interesting.
and there's a lot of crossover because they involve a lot of the same skills and the ability to think quickly under time pressure and to manage
the two-dimensional geometric aspect of it.
Yeah, geometric reasoning, memorizing large quantities of information that's not otherwise useful, the desire and willingness, the ability to spend lots of time on a board game rather than interacting with people outside of a board game context. I've heard people do that, but I think it. People who tend to like to interact in a less structured way with people don't end up in Scrabble tournaments or chess tournaments.
We're interacting outside of gaming, so we're normal, right?
Well, we're sort of, yeah, indeed.
But we're talking about gaming, so
we're talking about gaming, yeah. And I think you and I have probably spent more time playing board games with each other than having conversations with each other.
That's why this is so tense.
It is, actually. It's kind of pushing the limits for a relationship. In Scrabble, as in chess, there are personality, I don't want to say personality disorders, but nobody who plays Scrabble at a competitive level is neurotypical. Why don't Scrabble players in general lose their temper? It's because every Scrabble player at some point has to realize that they're not going to win most of their games. In fact, no matter how good they are, they're probably not going to win more than 75% of their games. And they have to accept the fact
Whereas in chess, you can win like 95% of your games if you're one of the best players in the world, right?
Right. And so we had this week at the North American Scrabble Championships, we had a defending champion doing a best of 5 match against a player who was, I can't say he wasn't as good, but a player who ended up getting all the good tiles in the last game that they played. He got very lucky. He still needed to know the entire dictionary to know what to do with them. But the champion failed to defend his title, and at the end of it, it went to the full 5 games. He lost 2-3. And I was asking him immediately afterwards how he felt about it, because, that's what you do when a sports figure loses something. You just get in their face and you say, "How do you feel right now?" And he actually was just completely relaxed. And he said, "Well, if I had to lose a game, I'm glad it was a game like that where my opponent drew all the tiles and there was really nothing I could do." And he just was completely relaxed. He said, I played well to make it to that 5th game, but sometimes the tile gods give and sometimes they take away. And he was just totally relaxed and zen about it, and I wouldn't say that everybody who wants to play competitive Scrabble can achieve that level of calmness, but those that stay with the game have to be able to cope with losing on a regular basis and understand that it just happens as part of life and as part of Scrabble. We have a player in Scrabble named Nigel Richards.
I was going to ask you about that guy, because
he was playing at this event. He is thought of as the greatest of all time in Scrabble. He is a multi-time world champion. He's won our North American championships, I think, 5 times. He's won not only the English championships, but the French language and Spanish language championships. There's nothing that this guy can't do in Scrabble, and yet he finished in 3rd place in our event. He failed to make it to the finals. And that was just due to a run of really bad luck on his last
And
day.
when you say drawing bad tiles,
Yeah.
like, I guess there are no bad tiles in the bag, but you mean tiles that don't go together to form.
Well, they're good tiles and bad tiles.
What's the best tile?
The two blanks are the best tiles. The four S's are the next best tiles. And then after that, people argue, and every now and then someone comes up with a new algorithm that proves that some tiles are better than others. But it used to be the Q was the worst tile. As soon as we added QI to the dictionary, it became a much more powerful tile. I think I personally hate the tiles I, U, V, and W the most. If you have an I, a U, a V, or a W on your rack and you don't play it, your next play is going to average about 4 points less than if you didn't have it. So those are just those are bad tiles in that they negatively affect your next turn equity.
Okay, so this is a question I was going to save for the end. What, according to a completely authoritative website I just checked, are the three-letter words with Q that don't have a U?
QIS,
Yes.
QAT.
Yes.
Some people would include SUQ because it has a U, but it doesn't follow the Q.
Wow.
There's also QIN.
You got all three.
But that's only good in international play. So we had like people playing with the North American dictionary. We had like 300 people here this week, of whom 3/4 of them maybe were playing in a scenario or a lexicon where QIN was not acceptable.
Okay, so you got all three. I thought I was going to expose you as a fraud, but I didn't.
I edit our word list, John. I mean, it doesn't mean that I know them all, but I know my 2s and 3s.
But that's why it would be all the more scandalous if you didn't know. So I take it that to be an incredibly elite Scrabble player, you have to more or less memorize the list of words that are playable. We were talking about this guy Nigel Richards, was just this insane thing where he accomplished that feat in English, then he accomplished that feat in French, and as I understand, won the French Scrabble championship. Then for fun, he did it in Spanish. As I also understand, he can't order a cup of coffee in a restaurant in either of those languages.
But to be fair, there have been a few people from Thailand who don't speak English who won the English language championship by memorizing the English dictionary. So
why is Scrabble so popular in Thailand? Because I know that you've flown off to Bangkok to do these tournaments.
In the specific case of Thailand, it's because a late friend of mine named Amnoy Ploisangnam got really hooked on it when he was a college student, and he built his life and career around it, and got his whole university doing it, did university versus university challenges, and then managed to persuade the Thai Ministry of Education that it was a good way for people to learn English, and got the support of the royal family in Thailand.
That was a much more comprehensive response than I expected, and also very interesting that one person could be such an effective promoter of a game.
He was a force of nature, and a lot of the good things in the world can be traced back to the actions of one person.
What you said was interesting because you said this is a great way to learn English.
No. I said that my friend persuaded the Ministry of Education that it was.
You don't need to know the meaning of any of these words. Like when you play Scrabble, you can challenge a person if the word isn't valid.
It's helpful to know the part of speech so that you know whether the word takes an S or an ED or ING.
And that's why the S is so good, right? Because you can just, like cat becomes cats.
It's because of the inflectional nature of the English language. If we were playing in Finnish, where the root vowel changes with inflections, Finnish, the S is useless.
This is what I wanted to ask you, because I know that you have a very deep engagement with language. You speak many languages, can translate into classical Greek. Your father, who's passed away, spoke dozens of languages, as I understand.
40 languages at least, yeah.
Yeah.
He had native or near native fluency in English, French, German, Spanish, Swedish, Russian, and Japanese.
You yourself speak a bunch of languages and obviously appreciate language in a very intimate way. But what your friend told, I don't know, university officials, government officials about how this being a good way to learn English, you can memorize all these lists in Scrabble without learning any of the definitions of the words you're using. It's not like one of these spelling bees where you say, can use it in a sentence and such. What is the relationship between your average elite Scrabble player and language? do they come to it through a love of language, or do they come to it through a love of like essentially code making and geometry and the kind of technical aspects of Scrabble? Are there people who are passionate about language and that's why they love Scrabble, or is it just people? Many people just don't care. They're just memorizing lists of words.
Well, I think there was an era, maybe up until the 1970s or 80s, when the best players were people who had a passion for language, and then the people who had passion for mathematics or board games.
The robots took over. And when did that happen?
It was before my time, but I think it was the 1970s or 80s. People were obsessed with Scrabble in the 50s, and then as they kept on playing in the 1970s, people started developing. They realized it could be played as a serious game, and it was basically the chess players started playing it and said, well, you can play to win and not just to show off your knowledge of words, at which point there was a bit of a schism. What I think is the greatest strength of Scrabble is that although the experts have created this version of Scrabble that is inaccessible to an average person, it hasn't resulted in what some people have called grognard capture, where the game dies because there's nothing left but experts. It's a game that can still be enjoyed at all different levels. You can use it as an educational tool in primary school to teach kids basic spelling and how letters can be used to extend words, to inflect them. You can use it as a family social bonding experience. Parents can play it with their kids. Grandparents can play it with their grandchildren. You can play it on dates as a sort of...
John, come on. That's pathetic. I mean, you had me until the date thing. By the way, we're both Canadian. And as you know, there's a famous Canadian Film Board animated short. I mean, this goes back, I think, to the 70s or 80s. I think it's National Film Board.
Yeah.
Even many people outside Canada might have seen it, where I forget what it's called, but it features a man and a woman in late middle age who are playing Scrabble, and yada yada yada, nuclear war ensues.
Yes. Yeah.
You're familiar with the short. The whole thing, they have this apocalyptic argument where like all of the problems in the relationship are brought to the surface because of their complaints about their Scrabble play. Like,
Yeah.
is it really a good date game? Is it a good marriage sustaining game?
It's a good date game. I wouldn't necessarily say it's not a good marriage sustaining game unless you both end up being the same sort of Scrabble player. That is to say, either the literary Scrabble player or the competitive Scrabble player. You can't have a mixed marriage and keep playing Scrabble.
But isn't the literary Scrabble player maybe even more insufferable than the competitive Scrabble player, because he or she will hold forth on the etymology of the word after he or she puts it down?
If you're married to one of those, then you either got to accept that about them or not play Scrabble.
Or you find it a deeply attractive trait.
Well, I will say, actually, speaking of like mixed marriages, the events at which I do have to keep an eye out for serious conflict and chair throwing or acts of violence are the ones that are the most international, because there are different Scrabble playing cultures around the world, and what is considered normal in one part of the world can be viewed as suspicious behavior.
Example, please.
People vary substantially, cultures vary substantially in their radius of personal space, let's put it that way. So there are countries where it is perfectly normal for all of your friends to stand like touching you while you're playing Scrabble, and others where you would expect civilized people to be at least 2 meters apart.
So I once watched a high-level competitive Canadian Scrabble game with you in a hotel, and I was all excited to see the final game, but then I had to go to another room because you can't have anybody in the same room during the finals.
Well, it's because Scrabble, it's not an open information game, right? Each player has information that has to be private to themselves, and if a spectator were to inadvertently reveal, say by clapping or gasping or whatever, that they saw something unusual on one player's rack, that would interfere with the outcome of the game.
Sorry, I misinterpreted. So you could have somebody looking at the rack, which is secret from the other player, and like bang his chair 3 times which means
Oh, yeah, yeah,
he has
yeah.
an S. Sorry, I misinterpreted. I thought you meant that people were standing behind their friend and giving them advice.
That can happen. Yeah, there can be accusations of that because if you get people from different parts of the world and a group of people talking in languages that are not mutually intelligible, then people say you can't talk to your friends. I mean, you could be asking them for advice.
So do you ever have to say, like, you guys need to disperse until this game's over?
For sure. I mean, I had to do that this week at the North American Championship. That people were just getting too close because there happened to be we have a couple of boards roped off with stanchions where we've got live streaming taking place, and we don't want anybody getting in the sight lines. But there was a game that was taking place outside of that area that was going to determine who was going to be a finalist, and I could tell that the players involved there were getting a little bit sort of pressured by the crowd of people that were forming around them to see who was going to win what was effectively a semifinal game. So I had to go and get my biggest, beefiest division leader to help just shove people back and set up a second barrier of stanchions. And yeah.
Beefiest enforcer at the Scrabble tournament.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about the gender issue, because
Mm-hmm.
we had a Harvard scholar write a great piece about some gender issues in chess. And one of the fascinating points she made, which I didn't realize, is that, first of all, a lot of women, perhaps more than men, are drawn to games with words. I know that when I've tried to introduce tabletop games
Mm-hmm.
to my wife and my daughters, I've had more success with
Mm-hmm.
Code Names is a popular game.
Yeah.
It's the pattern that this woman described in her article. She said that you see it in Scrabble and you see it in Bridge, is that at the recreational level, often you'll go to like a local tournament or, just a recreational meetup. And I think in Scrabble, it'd be mostly women.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get to the level, the elite levels where you kind of sort of have to dedicate a lot of your life to it, more and more you see men. The higher up you
Mm-hmm.
go, it's
Yeah.
men who might spend 30 hours a week on it, and some of the women are maybe have other other things to do with their time. Is this something that you and other tournament organizers think about?
Yeah. This is something that we've always been aware of. I would say that in our top expert division, at least 95% of the players identify as male, and at the bottom, I don't think we have divisions that are predominantly female, but it's much closer to even
But
at
just
the
the fact
lower
that
skill levels.
people are in a competitive niche means they're
Yeah.
past a certain recreational baseline. Like it's
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And if you ask a random person, a random Scrabble fan, if I tell people what I'm doing, then people will sometimes say, "Oh, I love playing Scrabble." And if I take that as a random sampling process, more people who are more women tell me that than men. But I think there's also something about if you want to become immersed in a tabletop game and make that a major focus of your life, you have to be neurodivergent in some way because neurotypical people don't think that board games are something that you should be playing all the time. They infantilize the activity of playing
Which is
tabletop
weird,
games.
but they do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it were bad, why would you make your kids play board games?
Right.
But I mean, clearly you're not grooming them for some sort of illicit adult activity. Talking this past week with a lot of female players at our event, I'm realizing that I think it's still the case that girls who are neurodivergent have a much harder time of life and adapting to their neurodivergence than boys do.
Well, maybe it's less
Boys feel
socially, it's more
yeah,
socially stigmatized in
yeah.
females, perhaps.
Boys even I mean my kids are in college now, but when they were in kindergarten, even at that time, if a boy was acting out or not well socialized, it was attributed to as being male rather than being
Mm,
different in some way.
okay.
Whereas girls were already at that point expected to behave themselves, and if they were wired differently in some way, they had a hard time of it.
Well, let me ask you a question about the how these brains are wired, because it was a couple of years ago, I'll leave the names out of it, obviously, but there were two great Scrabble players going against each other, and I asked you who you thought was going to win, and your quote, which stuck with me, it was such a brilliant quote. You said, "I think person B is going to win, because while person A is extremely gifted and brilliant, person B actually has something wrong with their brain. See, I made you laugh with your own words.
Yeah.
But that quote applies to a lot of different fields, very highly specialized pursuits. So Nigel Richards, we talked about him. He's the guy who has won Scrabble championships in at least 3 different languages that we know of. Maybe he's gone off and done others in secret. But look, I don't want to say, oh, there's something wrong with this person's brain, but it's obvious that his brain is a different kind of shape than the average person you meet at the supermarket.
I should say that when I say there's something wrong with Scrabble players' brains,
it's half joking.
It may be because of my Japanese upbringing, because in my mother's mother tongue, my late mother's mother tongue, the word chingao, which can mean either
it's different
or wrong.
Chigaimasu, right?
Chingaimasu. Chingaimasu means it's wrong or it's different, and it's weird to Japanese people that English distinguishes between the concepts of difference and wrongness. I mean, how could something be different and yet correct? Like, okay, so when I say people's brains are wrong, I may be partly channeling the Japanese side of my brain that just says different things.
See, when I was in Japanese class and they said, oh, if you want to correct someone, you say chigaimasu.
Yeah.
I assumed it was because you're being polite. Like you're too polite to say you're wrong. So you just say, oh, there are 2 realities, and the one I'd like to focus on is different from your reality.
Well, it is true that Japanese is a language that has evolved to avoid decapitation through inadvertent rudeness, right? So it's the more polite you get in Japanese, the less precise you can be. My favorite example of that is, the conjugation by politeness level of the verbs to come, to go, and to be in.
Irashaimasu.
Yeah, irashaimasu and mairimasu are the extreme polite forms, either for oneself or someone else. There's iku, kuru, and iru in the neutral forms, which mean to go, to come, and to be in the same place. But if you want to be polite, you literally don't know whether you're coming or going, because some guy like 500 years ago made the mistake of saying he was going somewhere when his master expected him to say he was coming from somewhere, and he had his head chopped off. What I mean when I say that someone's brain is wrong is that, to use the more modern term, I mean that they're neurodivergent. They're differently wired, and the reason that we run the North American Scrabble Players Association is as a sort of therapeutic / rescue service for people whose brains are wired to play Scrabble. And because people whose brains are wired to play Scrabble, they do well at some other activities, but they don't really, they will thrive once they know that they're in a community of like-minded people.
You and I both know that tabletop gaming isn't a single hobby. It's a constellation of hobbies. And so like I enjoy wargaming, and when you play complex war games, you meet a lot of guys who are systems engineers and database managers, because the ability to assimilate. We have a mutual friend who works for a company that does currency exchanges, and he's got to like organize all this information in his head. Whereas when you play role-playing games, some like Dungeons and Dragons, sometimes you meet people who are more artistic, who are looking for new experiences, and maybe you're into sword and sorcery. And like Scrabble, what is the kind of outside the game personality type, putting aside whether they're neurotypical or not, but in terms of what they do with their life outside of Scrabble? Because with elite chess players, again, this is a point that Danny Wrench makes in his book, outside of playing chess, they're often like teaching chess or they're running chess websites. But I'm not sure if Scrabble has that well-developed ecosystem of kind of jobs that you can have within the Scrabble community. Is there a kind of professional profile that you get from Scrabble players?
There's not a lot of money in adjacent to Scrabble. The winner of our championship took home $10,000 from a pot of 50,000.
But I bet that's higher than it was 20 years ago.
No, it's actually about the same as it was 20.
Why is that? Because let me just go further, because this book about chess, the author makes the point that live streaming and COVID have put tons more money in, because during COVID, a lot of people went online to do gaming. So chess exploded. Chess.com in particular exploded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm guessing online Scrabble, they're like
We
you're
we
doing this live streaming stuff at the tournament. I'm guessing
mhm.
10 or 15 years ago there wasn't live streaming, and I'm guessing some people are making money from it. No,
There was something. There was a very primitive sort of nascent equivalent of it, but no, yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't monetized back then. And yes, there are people who make a reasonable amount by streaming. There are Scrabble YouTubers out there, and that's something that's growing. And yes, the pandemic was good for us for that side of our activities. Wasn't at all good
yeah,
for the in-person stuff. Obviously, it was actually also curiously useful in a. And I know we're talking a global context, but specifically in Canada, because there was a an egress or diaspora from major urban centers as a result of the pandemic, and a lot of people moved to our East Coast. A lot of Scrabble players moved out there, and there didn't used to be any competitive Scrabble activity because there wasn't enough of a population density for it. But now we've got 3 clubs in provinces where we never had clubs before. Yeah, but so in terms of what Scrabble players do outside of playing Scrabble, the weird thing is, or one weird thing is that every Scrabble player thinks when they find their Scrabble playing community that they found their tribe, and that everybody in this tribe of Scrabble players must be wired exactly the same way as they are, and they must be interested in the same things. They're not. I mean, there's a good chunk of people who are interested in, say, baseball, because baseball
yeah.
has that same sort
I
of
get it. Yeah,
statistics and sort of memorizing large
I
amounts
know
of.
people who like baseball in that way.
Yeah,
Yes.
in that way, right? So
Yeah.
but they think the Scrabble players who are baseball fans think that everybody who plays Scrabble must be a baseball fan, and it's maybe 10% of us are. And then some of them like to play chess because they think, well, clearly, you like board games, you like memorizing things, you must like chess, and maybe that's 5 or 10% as well. Then there's a good correlation between Scrabble and musical ability. So, and there's a good correlation between Scrabble and mathematical ability. So when we're organizing a major event, we have to figure out what types of side events, like after hours events, will appeal to our players to keep them interested. We do have a music night where it's basically an open mic music night. And if there were a baseball game nearby, if there were even a minor league baseball field nearby, then there would definitely be one outing.
Let me talk about the age profile, because in chess you get these incredible prodigies who are like 13 or 14, but sometimes they start to lose their ability, or at least lose their international standing by the time they're in their mid to late 20s. And I mean, sometimes the truly elite players remain truly elite into their 30s and perhaps even their 40s. But you do get these adolescent phenoms who by the time they're in their 20s are just done. Do you get the same kind of extremely early peaking phenomenon in Scrabble? Like, are there 13 and 14-year-olds who do incredibly well at Scrabble tournament?
There have been world champions who have been as young as, I think, 19. I think players in their 20s are probably the greatest threat to us older players. However, it's not uncommon for someone in their 40s, 50s, or 60s to win a
Really?
major event, just because the Scrabble is not just about the words. The kids have an easier time of memorizing all the words in the dictionary. And the older players may have forgotten a bunch of words in the dictionary, but they've acquired a bag of tricks that can often get them out of tricky situations. And one problem that I have with the pandemic popularity of Scrabble is that it's resulted in too much of a knowledge transfer about tactics from older players to younger players, because younger players have been able to play so many, many more top level games online than they would have been able to do in person in a pre-pandemic era. So the advantage that older players had of having played thousands of competitive games is lost when a younger player can play thousands of competitive games online.
I remember Malcolm Gladwell, one of his books, he talked about how people who are great at things have typically invested, I think, 10,000 hours in it. And that was kind of this magic
Yeah,
number.
that's a reasonable estimate for Scrabble as well.
Yeah, except I always find that total garbage, because like I've tried to learn a lot of games, and
Mhm.
I know when I'm plateauing. I was on the bottom rung of my college chess team, and I could just tell
Mhm.
I wasn't getting better. And like I'd be on an airplane and some 10-year-old from Russia would kick my ass, and I gave up chess because I said my brain isn't shaped in a chess way. Like I can teach it to get to a certain level, but then it plateaus. I could put 100,000 hours in, and I'm not going to get
I
better.
gave up on chess in high school because I had the misfortune to have a classmate who was Hungarian and had been playing chess with his father, who was the correspondence chess champion of the world, and he'd been playing with his father since he was
But he
3.
saved you
And
time. He saved you time by showing you what a
he
chump you were.
did, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is Scrabble like that, where people get to a certain level, and if they don't have a Scrabble-shaped brain, they're just not going to get better?
For sure. I mean, if you don't have a Scrabble-shaped brain, you're probably never even going to make it to a Scrabble club or tournament. Usually, uh, we've had an advertising slogan a while ago that said, if you can beat all of your friends at Scrabble, you need to find new friends.
That's a strangely cultish slogan. You're dividing people from their peer group.
Well, they haven't
holding you
found the right
back.
friends yet, right? Yeah. People do plateau though, even past that level. We roughly divide players into novice players, and intermediate players, and expert players, and and world champion level players. And there are players who play their entire lives, and their ELO rating never gets out of a certain 100-point range. I wouldn't say that's due to, well, maybe it is due to lack of ability or wiring in some cases. You always know in Scrabble, and unless you're at the very top of the game, though, that if you made the trade-off of devoting more of your life to studying more words and practicing more games, you could become a better player. You could watch your ELO rating go up. That is to say, it's a very satisfying game in terms of seeing the reward of from that accrues to you from the effort that you put into it. I know that right now my ELO rating in Scrabble is probably a pathetic 1600 or so. If I wanted to get it up to 1900, all I would need to do would be to neglect all of my other duties for about 3 months and go back to studying thoroughly so that I would know all the 2s, 3s, 4s, high probability 7 and 8 letter words, and a few other tricks. If I had those down cold, then I could get at least up to 1800, and if I had a run of luck, up to 1900. I think most people who are at least expert players could, if they really, really wanted to sacrifice everything else in their life, they could have a reasonable shot at being a world champion. It's because of the element of luck in the game. I had a friend who was starting to play. She wanted to know what it would take to get her from expert to world champion status, and what words should she learn, and in what order, and how should she train. And I said, if you want to be the world champion, you need to learn all of the words, and you can learn them in whatever ways makes them stick in your brain. Learn them by probability, learn them alphabetically, but just set out a schedule. You can learn all of the words in 1 year. Just divide them up according to how many
How
you're
many
going to
words
learn
are
each day.
there in the, say, North American Scrabble dictionary?
You'd think I would have that number memorized. It's on the order of 200,000.
Yeah. So, but that in itself is a self-selection filter right there. Like the sort of person who would even attempt to memorize any significant portion of 200,000 words without even bothering to learn their definitions or etymology is like 1% of the population. So that in itself is a filter.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I stopped playing chess because learning the openings was too difficult. It was too much work. And what you're describing to me sounds like even more work.
Oh, it's a comparable amount of effort, and you can try to justify it by saying that you're learning words that you might use in other contexts, but really you're not going to. And but it's like the argument made to the Ministry of Education, not only in Thailand, as I said before, but in Pakistan, Nigeria, many African countries. Scrabble is viewed as a gamification of English language education. And I don't think it's a terrible idea. I don't think it's as successful an idea as its proponents make it out to be.
Is there a variation of Scrabble where you have to know the definition of a word? Because that would be a cool variation, and one that I might be competitive in.
I'm willing to give it a try with you, and if you want to play it,
No, you
play it
beat
that
me.
way.
But like I'm saying, I'd be over and above my normal level of terribleness.
There are people who play it informally on that basis.
Okay.
I
Well, it
did
just
actually
it adds more opportunities for pedantry, which is what I guess attracts me to it.
I did organize a tournament for the American Translators Association one year where you could play words in any
Yeah,
language that you
you
liked.
told me about that.
Yeah, but you had to be able to identify the language and preferably define the word.
Wow,
And
that's
I also pointed out that I told them that if they could that they could score the letters as though they were played using the Scrabble set from that language. So if you played the i- if you played the word whiskey, for instance, which is good both in English and French, you would score a lot more points for it if you played it as a French word because the W is worth 10 points in French, but only 4 points in English.
Is there a Japanese Scrabble played with katakana or whatnot?
Yeah, there are Japanese games like Scrabble, but they're not really seen as serious pursuits. There are there are sort of design issues because if you've got a character if you've got a language that's got at a minimum 47 syllables or hiragana or katakana used to represent it, then the number of pieces that you're going to have to play with,
And you need a bigger bag, and getting that bag over your head might
you need
actually
a bigger
cause
bag. Yeah,
you'd hurt
and we do
yourself.
actually offer accommodations for people with disabilities who can't raise the bag above their head. You mean you'd have to play with a bigger board in order to play all those extra tiles, and so typically the Japanese word games that involve letter tiles involve a much smaller set of tiles and rules that involve being able to, like, you're just playing anagrams with them, or you're allowed to move the tiles around to reuse them so that you don't have to have like 5 copies of the syllable eat, but you could use it for, you could take it away and from one word and put it in another.
Again, bringing it back to chess, because on like chess is kind of a point of reference, I think, for a lot of people when they think of serious tabletop games. And in this book, Danny Rench talks about how two things really made chess.com take off. One was COVID,
Yeah.
and the other was this TV show. The Queen's Gambit had this quantum effect on the chess world. Like people wanted to take up chess, and girls, boys, like it was this huge effect. This is a serious question because I can, and I'm not telling you it's a serious question. I'm telling my listeners it's a serious question because I can hear them sniggering preemptively. Is,
Do you often hear people sniggering inside your head, John?
uh, are they in the room with you right now? Is there a movie or a highly acclaimed TV series to be made about the Scrabble world? And by the way, I'm not talking about one of these documentaries where it's like, let's meet the weird people who play Parcheesi. It's like a novelty. I'm talking about where it's a serious drama at face value where the characters are Scrabble players. Is that doable? And I don't want to workshop a script with you right now, although we can do that after. But is that theoretically possible given the highly technical nature of the game?
There was a book that came out maybe 20 years ago called Word Freak by Stefan Fatsis that had the closest effect to the Queen's Gambit
Word
effect.
freak?
Word Freak, yeah.
Okay. That sounds derogatory though.
Yeah. And I hate myself for doing this, but I feel like I ought to plug Stefan's latest book, which he was heavily plugging at our most recent event. He's written an expose about the Merriam-Webster Dictionary Company.
An expose of the dictionary company?
Yeah,
Wow.
called Unabridged. He's an interesting guy, and he's a very entertaining journalist. So, anyway, so that the first national championship that we had after that came out, we had 800 players compared to our usual 300 or 400 people, and they all came because they'd read this book, which was a New York Times bestseller, and so we thought, oh, great, these people are all going to stick around, and we'll have twice as many people as we did, because we know that our problem is that we have about 2,000 people in North America who are regular tournament players, and we know that there are probably about 10,000 people, but they're so stuck inside their brains that they can't find us. And so what we really need is for a movie or a book to come out that the friends and family of these people that are stuck inside their brains and need to play Scrabble can see and hear about, and then tell their person who's been born with the ability to play Scrabble and the need to play Scrabble, can tell this person that they need to go and find the Scrabble club that they didn't previously know about. And it'll happen every now and then. There's some sort of minor project that reaches a broader audience. And in fact, the reason that why we run national championships is just to get the word out there so that people will find out. And I think this is also why we help sponsor YouTubers and so on to get the word out.
John, if there's a person listening to this who loves Scrabble and has outgrown their local Scrabble flunkies and, condescends to play with his or her spouse and they've outgrown that and they want to get to the next level, they're one of those, other 8,000 or 10,000 would-be shadow tournament players we're talking about. What should they do? Where should they go?
Well, first of all, they can go to to our website, scrabbleplayers.org.
Scrabbleplayers.org?
Yeah,
okay.
or NASPA, the North American Scrabble Players Association, which is not the same as the other NASPA or the other
John,
NASPA.
I'm trying to promote your product, and you're making this so complicated.
However, even people who like to play Scrabble, they don't really like change, and the idea of actually going out to a club or a tournament, it can be a big step for them. I mean, it took me 3 months to decide that I wanted to actually go meet people who played Scrabble because it was such a foreign idea to me. When I first started playing, I was playing online. I thought, oh, this is fun. It's a nice distraction for my thesis. And then the people I was playing with said, you can do this in real life, right? And I'm thinking, well, why would I want to do this in real life? And it took 3 months for these people to persuade me that I really ought to meet someone in person and play it. And it was a life-changing experience. But it takes a while for people to understand that the experience of physically meeting other people that share common interests with you, it can enrich your life. However, as an intermediate step to that, there's a pandemic project that some friends of mine started for people to have a tournament-like or or club-like experience online. And I'd also like to help push that. They've got a website called woogles.io. Don't ask why.
Say it again.
woogles.io. And it's basically the chess.com of Scrabble.
Woogles.io.
Yeah. And so this touches on the other thing that when you asked about can we have a Scrabble movie, the reason that it's called woogles.io and nothing to do with Scrabble is because Scrabble is a registered trademark of Hasbro in Canada and the United States and of Mattel Incorporated elsewhere. And nothing I'm saying should be construed as being endorsed or supported in any way by either Hasbro or Mattel. And so the reason why there has not been a Scrabble movie and why there's unlikely to be a Scrabble movie is because it would require the approval of two organizations, two corporations that have in the past been bitter rivals. And not only that, we'd need to get approval from both Hasbro and Mattel. But the way that I understand the way the global film industry works now is that if you were only able to get rights to a project for either inside North America or outside North America, it would never get off the ground because unless you have at least the potential for global rights for something, people aren't interested. There has to be the potential that something could go really, really big and worldwide for it to be worth putting money into. But say someone were to buy the rights to the Scrabble trademark from both companies, or the trademark were to lapse somehow due to inattention on the part of the legal staff of the trademark holders. Could we, in theory, have an entertaining story about Scrabble? For sure, and you just have to come and hang out at a Scrabble tournament and find out what people get up to both after hours and in between tournaments. It's
problem is the heroes of your game aren't exactly chatterboxes. Like Nigel Richards is a man of few words, as I understand, and I went to a Canadian championship, and the guy who won it, brilliant guy, but wasn't exactly looking to be interviewed.
There are people. Yeah, okay. Those are two sort of extreme examples.
Media training would help. Like, is there any kind of program in the works to give media training to some of your superstars?
Yeah,
I could help.
There are some of our Scrabble players, I will admit, are not educable in that way. There are younger, more media savvy, more personable players than the ones that you've talked with. I would encourage you to look at there's a YouTuber named Will Anderson.
Will Anderson, okay.
Who works for Scopely, who are the makers of the Scrabble Go app. but he's also on his own. He's produced a very popular and really engaging series of YouTube videos about Scrabble culture and Scrabble history, and anybody that wants to know about it should go there. Last year's national champion, a guy named Mac Meller, Meller, Mack. He's does YouTube videos more about Scrabble strategy, but he's also he's of a younger generation that's grown up understanding that they need to be able to communicate. And even Nigel Richards, there are people that he will talk to. Let's put it that way. And he's actually softened a little bit over the course of the pandemic. He he has an absurdist sense of humor, and so I was able to make him laugh every now and then.
Oh, okay.
And we had our event photographer at this event. He noticed that every time Nigel came to submit scores, you're supposed to submit scores on your smartphone. Nigel he doesn't do smartphones. He's got an old Nokia phone that predates flip phones.
But that's so perfect. Like, that's just like, you'd be disappointed if it were otherwise, I think. I'd love to have Nigel Richards on the show. Chances seem very low.
Yeah.
But, stranger things have happened.
I'll send Nigel Richards a link to this, and I'll make sure he gets it by sending it to a friend of his.
John Chu, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with the Quillette podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's been fun. Thank you for having me.